On what should have been a peaceful flight, Marcus Williams just wanted a few quiet hours with his 7-year-old son. But the moment a young white woman behind him propped her dirty feet on his seat, not once but repeatedly, with a smirk on her face, everything changed. What started as a small act of disrespect quickly spiraled into a confrontation that silenced the entire cabin. Passengers watched. A captain intervened. And by the time the plane landed, one young woman had learned a lesson she would carry for the rest of her life. What really happened at 30,000 feet? Marcus Williams hadn't slept more than 4 hours a night in over 2 years. Ever since his wife passed, he had become everything to his son. Father, mother, comforter, and protector all rolled into one. At 38 years old, he had learned that exhaustion was just another part of loving someone completely. Today was supposed to be different. Today, for the first time since the funeral, he was taking Jaden to visit his grandparents in Atlanta. The boy had been asking about them for months, flipping through old photo albums and pointing at pictures of his grandmother's garden, his grandfather's workshop, the tire swing that still hung from the oak tree in the backyard. Marcus had finally saved enough vacation days and scraped together enough money to make the trip happen. Now, settling into seat 24B, Marcus allowed himself a rare moment of hope. The window seat beside him held his 7-year-old son, already drowsy from waking up at 4 in the morning to catch the flight. Jaden clutched a small pillow against his chest, faded blue, with a cartoon superhero printed on the front. It had been a gift from his mother, given to him on his 5th birthday, just 3 months before she got sick. The boy never traveled without it. Marcus watched as Jaden's eyes grew heavy, his small head slowly tilting until it came to rest against his father's shoulder. The weight of it, so slight and so precious, made Marcus's chest tighten. He reached over and adjusted the blanket around his son's shoulders, then leaned his own head back against the seat and closed his eyes. For a few minutes, everything was peaceful. The boarding process continued around them, the shuffle of feet in the aisle, the thump of luggage being shoved into overhead bins, the murmur of conversations blending into white noise. Marcus let it wash over him, grateful for the ordinary sounds of travel, grateful for this small window of rest before the chaos of the visit began. Then he heard them. 3 young women, probably in their early 20s, made their way down the aisle with all the subtlety of a marching band. They were laughing loudly, talking over each other, completely oblivious to the passengers around them who were trying to settle in. The one in the middle, blonde, pretty, with perfectly manicured nails wrapped around a rose gold phone, seemed to be the leader. She held her device up at arm's length, clearly recording herself as she walked. "Oh my God, we're finally on," she announced to her phone screen. 6 hours to Atlanta, baby. Let's go! Her friends giggled on either side of her. The one by the window, a brunette with oversized sunglasses pushed up on her head, echoed everything the blonde said with enthusiastic agreement. The third girl, darker-haired and quieter, followed behind them with her eyes fixed on the floor. They stopped at row 25. Directly behind Marcus and Jaden. Marcus felt the seat shudder as they threw themselves into their places, still chattering loudly. He glanced down at Jaden, relieved to see that his son was still asleep, undisturbed for now. Maybe they would quiet down once the plane took off. Maybe this would be fine. The blonde, Marcus would later learn her name was Lily, took the middle seat. She was still filming, narrating her every move to whatever audience watched her online. "Okay, so the seats are kind of small, but whatever. We're gonna make it work, right, Megan?" The brunette laughed. "We always do." The plane began to taxi toward the runway. Marcus felt the familiar rumble beneath his feet, the slight pressure as the aircraft picked up speed. He kept his eyes closed, one hand resting protectively on Jaden's arm, counting down the seconds until they were airborne and he could finally, truly relax. That was when he felt it. A sharp jolt against the back of his seat, then another. His eyes snapped open just as a third kick landed, hard enough to shake the entire seat frame. Jaden jerked awake, his eyes wide and confused. "Daddy?" Marcus turned around. Lily had propped her feet up on the back of his seat, her sneakers, dirty, scuffed, clearly worn through several city blocks, pressed flat against the fabric just inches from his headrest. She wasn't even looking at him. Her attention was fixed on her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. "Excuse me," Marcus said, keeping his voice calm and polite. "Could you please not kick the seat? My son is trying to sleep." Lily's eyes flicked up from her phone. She looked at Marcus, really looked at him, her gaze traveling slowly from his face, down to his chest, and back up again. Something shifted in her expression. Not embarrassment, not apology. Something closer to amusement. "Relax," she said, drawing out the word like she was speaking to a child. "It's not a big deal." Beside her, Megan snickered and raised her phone, angling it toward Marcus as if she might record his reaction. On Lily's other side, the quiet girl, Sophie, lowered her eyes and said nothing. Marcus held Lily's gaze for a moment, then turned back around. He pulled Jaden closer, smoothing down the boy's hair. "It's okay, buddy. Try to go back to sleep." But Jaden was fully awake now, his eyes troubled. He clutched his superhero pillow tighter and stared at the seat in front of him, as if he could see through it to the woman behind. For a few minutes, there was silence. Marcus allowed himself to hope that the confrontation was over, that Lily had gotten whatever petty satisfaction she needed and would leave them alone for the rest of the flight. Then the kicking started again. This time, it was harder, more deliberate. Each impact sent a tremor through the seat that Marcus could feel in his spine. He heard Lily's voice, pitched just loud enough for him to hear. "Some people are just so sensitive." Megan burst out laughing. Marcus's jaw tightened. He could feel the anger rising in his chest, hot and sharp, but he forced it down. Not here. Not in front of Jaden. He had spent 7 years teaching his son that dignity meant keeping your composure, that real strength was knowing when to walk away. He wasn't about to throw that lesson away because of some thoughtless young woman who had never been told no. But Jaden was watching him. The boy's eyes were fixed on his father's face, searching for something. Guidance, maybe, or permission to be upset. When he spoke, his voice was small and uncertain. "Daddy, why is she being mean to us?" The question hit Marcus harder than any of Lily's kicks. He looked down at his son, at the confusion and hurt written across that innocent face, and felt something crack open inside him. "Sometimes people forget their manners, buddy," he said softly, stroking Jaden's hair. "It's okay." Behind him, Lily let out a sharp laugh. "Manners? That's rich." Marcus closed his eyes. He could hear passengers in the surrounding rows starting to shift and murmur. An elderly woman in seat 23C had turned around and was watching the scene with a deep frown. A businessman across the aisle had lowered his laptop screen, his attention caught by the rising tension. Marcus turned around one more time. He met Lily's eyes and spoke quietly, firmly, with all the restraint he could manage. "I'm asking you respectfully. Please stop kicking my seat. My son is 7 years old. He's tired and he's scared, and you're making this flight very difficult for both of us." For a split second, something flickered across Lily's face. Surprise, maybe, or the faintest edge of shame. But then her expression hardened. She sat up straighter, her chin lifting in defiance. "Oh my God," she said loudly enough for half the cabin to hear. "Why are you harassing me? I'm literally just sitting here." Heads turned. Passengers craned their necks to see what was happening. Marcus could feel their eyes on him, some sympathetic, some curious, some carefully blank. Megan jumped in, her voice dripping with false outrage. "Seriously, leave her alone. She wasn't even doing anything." Sophie remained silent, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her gaze fixed on the seat pocket in front of her. Marcus turned back around. His heart was pounding, but his face betrayed nothing. He looked down at Jaden, who was staring up at him with wide, questioning eyes. "Daddy?" Did you do something wrong?" The words cut deeper than Marcus could have imagined. He pulled his son close, wrapping an arm around the boy's thin shoulders. "No, buddy. I didn't do anything wrong, and neither did you." But even as he said it, Marcus could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. This wasn't just about a kicked seat anymore. This was about something bigger, something uglier, something he had hoped his son wouldn't have to understand for a few more years at least. He had a choice to make. He could continue to sit in silence, absorb every kick and every insult, and teach his son that their dignity was something other people could take from them without consequence. Or he could stand up for himself, for both of them, and risk escalating a situation that was already dangerously close to boiling over. Marcus looked at Jaden. The boy's eyes were still fixed on him, waiting, trusting, believing that whatever his father decided would be the right thing. In that moment, Marcus realized that the lesson his son learned today would stay with him forever, and he wasn't sure yet what that lesson should be. The seatbelt sign overhead dinged softly as the plane climbed higher into the clouds. The tension hung in the air like humidity before a storm. Marcus sat perfectly still, his arm wrapped around Jaden, his eyes fixed on the seat back in front of him. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing against his chest, making each breath feel heavier than the last. It was the flight attendant who broke the silence first. She appeared in the aisle with the practiced calm of someone who had dealt with difficult passengers 1,000 times before. Her name tag read Jessica, and her smile was professional but strained at the edges. She leaned down toward row 25, her voice low but firm. "Excuse me, ladies. I've received some concerns about noise and seat kicking. I'm going to need you to sit properly and keep your feet on the floor." Lily looked up from her phone, her expression shifting from surprise to indignation in the span of a heartbeat. "Are you serious right now? I paid for this seat. I can sit however I want." Jessica's smile didn't waver, but something hardened in her eyes. "Ma'am, I understand, but we need to be considerate of other passengers. The gentleman in front of you has asked multiple times for you to stop." Megan jumped in immediately, her voice high and defensive. "This is so unfair. We weren't even doing anything wrong. He's totally overreacting." Sophie said nothing. She sat rigid in her seat, her fingers wrapped tightly around the armrest, her gaze fixed on some invisible point in the distance. But Marcus noticed something in her posture, a tension that looked less like solidarity with her friends and more like the discomfort of someone who wished she could disappear. Jessica turned to Marcus, her expression softening. "Sir, I'm very sorry for the inconvenience. Would you like me to see if we can find you another seat?" Marcus felt Jaden's small hand tighten around his arm. He looked down at his son, at the worry creasing the boy's forehead, and made his decision. "No, thank you," he said quietly. "We're fine where we are." Jessica nodded, though her eyes lingered on him with something like understanding. She turned back to Lily and Megan. "Ladies, I'm asking you one more time to please keep your feet down and your voices at a reasonable level. If I have to come back here again, there will be consequences." She walked away before Lily could respond. For a moment, the cabin settled into an uneasy quiet. Marcus allowed himself a small breath of relief. Maybe that would be the end of it. Maybe Jessica's warning had been enough to put a stop to the behavior. Jaden tugged at his sleeve. "Daddy, why didn't we move?" Marcus looked down at his son, weighing his words carefully. "Because this is our seat, buddy. We didn't do anything wrong. We don't have to run away just because someone is being unkind." Jaden considered this, his small brow furrowed in thought. Then he nodded slowly and pressed himself closer to his father's side. "I don't want to move anyway. This is our seat." Marcus felt a swell of pride mixed with heartache. His son was learning, absorbing every moment of this experience, filing it away in that growing catalog of lessons about how the world worked. He just wished the world didn't have to teach such hard lessons so young, The peace lasted less than 10 minutes. Marcus was just beginning to relax, his eyes drifting closed when he felt it, a sharp, deliberate kick against the back of his seat. Then another, then a third, so hard that it jolted him forward. His eyes snapped open. Around him, passengers who had returned to their books and phones looked up again, their attention drawn by the unmistakable sound of conflict resuming. This time, Jaden reacted before Marcus could. The boy turned around in his seat, rising up on his knees to peer over the headrest at the woman behind them. His face held no anger, no accusation, only a deep, genuine confusion that made him look even younger than his 7 years. "Why do you keep doing that?" Jaden asked, his voice small but clear. "Did we do something wrong?" The question cut through the cabin like a blade. Lily's smirk faltered. For just a moment, something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe, or the first stirring of shame. But then Megan laughed nervously beside her, and the moment passed. Sophie, however, did not laugh. She was staring at Jaden with an expression that Marcus couldn't quite read. Discomfort, perhaps, or the dawning recognition of how far things had gone. She reached over and touched Lily's arm. "Lily, maybe we should just stop," Sophie said quietly. "Come on." Lily jerked her arm away. "Oh, don't be such a baby. I'm not doing anything." But the damage was done. Jaden's innocent question had pierced something in the atmosphere of the cabin, and suddenly other passengers began to speak. The elderly woman in row 23 turned around fully, her silver hair catching the overhead light, her eyes sharp with disapproval. "Young lady, that child has done nothing to you, absolutely nothing. You should be ashamed of yourself." A man in row 22, the businessman Marcus had noticed earlier with his expensive watch and his pressed shirt, closed his laptop with a decisive snap. "This is completely unacceptable behavior. Show some respect for the people around you." From somewhere behind them, a woman's voice rose above the murmur. Marcus couldn't see her, but he could hear the exhaustion and frustration in her tone. "My baby can't sleep because of all this commotion. Do you have any idea how hard it is to travel with an infant?" Lily's face reddened. She looked around the cabin, taking in the sea of disapproving faces, and for the first time, her confidence seemed to crack. "Why is everyone attacking me?" Her voice climbed higher, defensive and shrill. "I didn't do anything wrong. He's the one who keeps turning around and bothering us." Megan tried to back her up, but her voice had lost its earlier enthusiasm. "Yeah, seriously, everyone needs to just calm down." No one calmed down. The elderly woman shook her head slowly, her lips pressed into a thin line of disappointment. The businessman muttered something under his breath and returned to his laptop, but his jaw was tight with barely contained irritation. Other passengers exchanged glances, some sympathetic toward Marcus, others simply weary of the drama unfolding around them. And then Sophie spoke again. This time her voice was louder, clearer. She turned to face Lily directly, and there was something new in her expression. Not anger exactly, but a kind of resolve that hadn't been there before. "Lily, just stop. This isn't funny anymore." She gestured toward Marcus and Jaden without looking at them. "Look at that kid. Just look at him." Lily stared at her friend as if she had been slapped. "Are you serious right now? You're taking their side?" Sophie didn't back down. "I'm not taking anyone's side. I'm just saying this has gone way too far, and you know it." The tension between the two young women crackled in the air. Megan looked back and forth between them, uncertain whose lead to follow. The cabin seemed to hold its breath. Marcus turned back around, pulling Jaden gently down into his seat. His heart was racing, but he kept his face calm for his son's sake. Whatever happened next, he wanted Jaden to see him handle it with dignity. But Jaden wasn't looking at him anymore. The boy's eyes were distant, troubled, working through something that Marcus couldn't see. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, but in the hush of the cabin, it carried. "Daddy, is she angry because of how we look?" Marcus felt the words hit him like a physical blow. His throat tightened, his vision blurred for just a moment before he blinked it clear. He opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. What could he possibly say? How could he explain to a 7-year-old that sometimes people treated you differently for reasons that had nothing to do with who you were or what you had done? Behind them, Lily had gone completely still. She had heard. Marcus knew she had heard because her face had drained of color. She sat frozen in her seat, her phone forgotten in her lap, her eyes wide and fixed on some point in the middle distance. For the first time since the flight began, she looked truly shaken. Sophie leaned closer to her, and when she spoke, her voice was quiet but cutting. "See what you did?" Lily's lips parted. She looked like she wanted to say something, an excuse, a denial, anything. But no words came. She just sat there, pale and silent, as the weight of the moment pressed down on all of them. That was when the man in the back of the plane stood up. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with close-cropped gray hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to command. He wore civilian clothes, a simple polo shirt and khakis, but there was an authority in the way he moved that made people instinctively step aside. As he walked up the aisle toward row 25, conversations died, and heads turned to follow his progress. He stopped beside the row and looked down at Lily with an expression that could have frozen water. "I'm Captain Rodriguez," he said, his voice deep and measured. "I'm not working this flight, but I've been sitting back there for the past 20 minutes, watching this entire situation unfold." Lily looked up at him, her earlier bravado completely gone. She looked young suddenly and scared. We were just—" Captain Rodriguez held up a hand, silencing her. "Do you understand that interfering with cabin crew and causing a disturbance on an aircraft is a federal offense? Under FAA regulations, I have the authority to recommend that you be restrained for the remainder of this flight and met by law enforcement when we land." Lily's face crumpled. Tears sprang to her eyes, spilling down her cheeks before she could stop them. "I didn't mean... I wasn't trying to—" The captain cut her off, his voice unwavering. "What you meant doesn't matter. What matters is what you did." He glanced toward Marcus and Jaden, then back at Lily. "A 7-year-old boy just asked his father if you were being cruel to them because of how they look. A 7-year-old. I want you to sit with that. I want you to think about what kind of person makes a child ask a question like that." Lily was crying openly now, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Megan had shrunk back against the window, her face pale. Sophie sat with her head bowed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Captain Rodriguez straightened and nodded to Jessica, who had reappeared in the aisle. "Please move this young lady to the back of the aircraft. She'll sit there for the remainder of the flight under supervision." Jessica stepped forward. "Ma'am, if you'll come with me." Lily stood on trembling legs. She didn't look at Marcus or Jaden as she shuffled into the aisle. Megan hesitated for a moment, then grabbed her bag and followed, keeping her head down. Sophie remained in her seat, alone now, her face hidden behind a curtain of dark hair. As Lily passed Marcus's row, she finally looked at him. Her eyes were red and swollen, her makeup smeared, all traces of her earlier arrogance stripped away. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. Then she was past him, walking toward the back of the plane with Jessica's hand on her elbow. Marcus watched her go. He felt no satisfaction, no triumph, just a bone-deep weariness and a sadness that seemed to settle into his very bones. He looked down at Jaden. The boy was watching Lily's retreat with an expression that surprised Marcus. Not anger, not relief, but something softer. Something that looked almost like pity. Marcus pulled his son close and pressed a kiss to the top of his head. Whatever lesson Jaden was learning from this moment, Marcus hoped it would be the right one. He hoped his son would remember not just the cruelty they had faced, but the way they had faced it, with dignity, with restraint, with the quiet strength that came from knowing your own worth. The plane flew on through the clouds, carrying them toward Atlanta, toward family, toward whatever came next. The remaining hours of the flight passed in a strange, heavy silence. The cabin had returned to its usual routines, passengers reading, sleeping, watching movies on their seatback screens. But something had shifted in the air. People glanced toward Marcus and Jaden as they walked to the restroom or stretched their legs, offering small nods of acknowledgement, quiet gestures of solidarity. Marcus barely noticed. His mind was elsewhere, turning over the events of the past few hours, trying to make sense of them. He had faced prejudice before, more times than he could count. But this was different. This time, his son had been there to witness it, to absorb it, to carry it forward into whatever understanding of the world he was building inside his young mind. Jaden had been quiet since Lily was taken to the back of the plane. He sat curled against the window, his superhero pillow clutched to his chest, watching the clouds drift by below them. Every now and then, he would glance toward the back of the cabin, his expression thoughtful and troubled. Finally, he spoke. "Daddy, will she be okay?" Marcus looked at his son, struck by the question. After everything that had happened, after the kicks and the cruel words and the moment that had made Jaden question whether he was hated for the color of his skin, the boy's first thought was still for the person who had hurt him. "You're worried about her?" Marcus asked softly. Jaden nodded, his small fingers tracing the outline of the superhero on his pillow. "She was mean, but she looked really sad when she walked away, like she was going to cry forever." He was quiet for a moment, working through something in his mind. "Maybe nobody ever taught her how to be nice." Marcus felt his eyes sting. He pulled Jaden close, wrapping both arms around the boy's thin shoulders, breathing in the familiar scent of his hair. His son was 7 years old. 7 years old. And already he understood something that many adults never learned. That cruelty often came from emptiness. That the people who hurt others were sometimes the ones who needed compassion the most. It was exactly what Marcus had tried to teach him. And yet, holding his son in that moment, he felt a deep ache of grief. Jaden shouldn't have to learn these lessons yet. He shouldn't have to extend grace to people who had never offered him any. He should be thinking about superheroes and playgrounds and what kind of cake he wanted for his next birthday, not about why a stranger on an airplane might hate him for how he looked. But the world didn't wait until children were ready. The world taught its lessons whenever it pleased, and all Marcus could do was help his son make sense of them. "I think you might be right, buddy," Marcus said quietly. "I think maybe nobody taught her. But that's not an excuse for how she acted." Jaden nodded seriously. "I know, but I still hope she learns." At the back of the plane, Lily sat alone in the last row. Megan had moved to a different seat shortly after they arrived, unwilling to be associated with the fallout. The flight attendant assigned to watch Lily had stepped away to help with drink service, leaving her in isolation with nothing but her thoughts and the window beside her. She stared out at the endless blue sky, her face streaked with dried tears, her eyes red and swollen. Her phone sat dark and forgotten in the seat pocket. For the first time in as long as she could remember, she had no desire to film anything, to share anything, to perform for an audience that existed only on a screen. All she could think about was that little boy's voice, asking his father if she hated them because of how they looked. She had never thought of herself as that kind of person. She had never used slurs, never marched with torches, never done any of the things that she associated with real racism. But sitting there in the back of the plane, replaying the last hour in her mind, she couldn't escape the truth that was slowly taking shape in her chest. She had looked at that man and his son and decided without even thinking about it, that they didn't deserve her respect. She had treated them as less than. And when they had asked her to stop, she had doubled down, because some part of her believed that she had the right to do whatever she wanted, and they had no right to object. The realization made her feel sick. The plane began its descent into Atlanta. When the aircraft finally came to a stop at the gate, passengers rose from their seats and began gathering their belongings. Marcus stayed seated, waiting for the crowd to thin. He was in no hurry. His parents wouldn't arrive at the airport for another hour, and he wanted to give Jaden a few more minutes of peace before they faced the chaos of the terminal. They were among the last to leave. Marcus helped Jaden into his backpack, adjusted his own carry-on over his shoulder, and led his son down the aisle toward the exit. He didn't expect to see Lily waiting for them. She stood just inside the jet bridge, her back pressed against the wall, her arms wrapped around herself as if she were trying to hold herself together. Her face was pale and blotchy, her eyes swollen almost shut from crying. Megan was nowhere to be seen. She had apparently left as quickly as possible, eager to distance herself from the disaster. But Sophie stood a few feet away, watching Lily with an expression that was part concern, part expectation. When Lily saw Marcus and Jaden approaching, she straightened. Her hands trembled at her sides. She opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. "Sir, I'm so sorry." Her voice cracked on the last word. She took a shaky breath and forced herself to continue. "I don't have any excuse for what I did. It was wrong. All of it." She looked at Jaden, and her face crumpled. "And what your son said, what he asked you." She pressed a hand to her mouth, fighting to keep her composure. I never wanted a kid to think that about himself because of me. I never wanted to be that person." Marcus studied her for a long moment. He saw the genuine anguish in her eyes, the shame that hunched her shoulders and made her look smaller than she had seemed on the plane. She was young, barely more than a kid herself, really, and she was clearly in the middle of the most humiliating experience of her life. But he also remembered the contempt in her voice when she had told him to relax. He remembered the way she had looked at him, sizing him up, dismissing him before he had even spoken. He remembered his son's small voice, asking if they were hated for how they looked. "I appreciate you saying that," Marcus said finally. His voice was calm, neither cold nor warm. "But the person you should be thinking about isn't just my son. It's every person you'll meet from now on. We all have the power to make someone's day better or worse. Today, you made a little boy question his worth. I hope you remember that." Lily nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I will. I promise I will." Sophie stepped forward and placed a gentle hand on Lily's shoulder. She guided her friend toward the exit, but before they could leave, a small voice called out behind them. "Bye. I hope you feel better." Lily turned. Jaden was standing beside his father, one hand clutching his superhero pillow, the other raised in a small wave. His expression held no anger, no resentment, only the simple, uncomplicated kindness of a child who had somehow found it in his heart to forgive. Lily tried to smile. It came out broken, trembling, but real. She raised her own hand in return, then turned and walked away with Sophie close beside her. Marcus watched them go. Then he looked down at his son and felt something loosen in his chest. Not quite peace, but something close to it. Pride, maybe, and hope. A few weeks later, Marcus sat at his kitchen table late one night, Jaden long since asleep in his room down the hall. On impulse, he opened his laptop and navigated to a forum he had joined years ago, a community for single fathers, a place where men like him shared their struggles and triumphs without judgment. He began to type. He told the story of the flight, keeping it anonymous, changing small details to protect everyone involved. He wrote about Lily's behavior and his own uncertainty about how to respond. He wrote about Captain Rodriguez's intervention and Lily's tearful apology at the gate. And he wrote about Jaden, about his son's innocent question, his unexpected compassion, his small wave goodbye. The post went up and Marcus closed his laptop and went to bed. By morning, the story had been shared hundreds of times. By the end of the week, it had spread across multiple platforms, drawing thousands of comments from people who had experienced similar situations, moments of casual disrespect that cut deeper than the perpetrators would ever understand. A month passed. Life returned to normal, or as normal as it ever was for a single father raising a 7-year-old. Then one evening, Marcus opened his email and found a message from an address he didn't recognize. "Dear sir, you probably don't remember me, but I was the girl on the plane. I've thought about that day every single day since it happened. I've started reading about privilege, about respect, about things I never had to think about before because I never had to. I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. I'm writing because I wanted you to know that your son taught me more in one sentence than anyone else has in my entire life. I'm trying to be better. Thank you for not giving up on teaching him to be kind, even to people like me." Marcus read the email twice. Then he looked up from his screen to where Jaden sat at the other end of the table, bent over a worksheet, his pencil scratching softly against the paper. A smile spread slowly across Marcus's face. "Maybe there's hope after all," he murmured to himself. Outside the window, the evening sky was turning gold, and somewhere out there, a young woman was learning to see the world differently, one difficult lesson at a time.
If this story touches or hurts, please follow and share it so more people can find hope there in their own storm. So support help us bring more stories of the Thai courage and kindness to life.